Hello, my name is Robert Baines. I am the president of the NATO Association of Canada. The NATO Association is charged with informing Canadians about the value of security and the importance of NATO. To do that, of course, it's a bit of a challenge. We are always looking to involve ourselves in discussions going on in day-to-day Canadians' lives because they don't often think of security. We try to make sure that they realize that security itself is attached to every issue that they come upon in their life. And today I'm really thrilled to be able to help host Clare Hutchinson, the Secretary General's representative for Women, Peace and Security. And to help me with this, I've got two of my outstanding team members at the NATO Association, Nicole and Anjena, who will introduce themselves and then further introduce Clare Hutchinson. Nicole, Anjena, please take it away.
Thank you, Robert. As Robert mentioned, my name is Nicole Doherty, and I am an intern at the NATO Association, whose interests include women in security, cybersecurity, property theft, and surveillance. And with that, I will hand it over to Anjena. Anjena?
Hello, my name is Anjena Balachandran, and I am also an intern at the NATO Association of Canada. My interests include women, peace and security, youth, peace and security, and international relations. So I guess we can get started. I can first start off by thanking Ms. Clare Hutchinson for joining us this morning, and I will also give a little introduction. So Ms. Clare Hutchinson first took office as NATO Secretary Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security in 2018. She is the high-level focal point of all aspects of NATO's contribution to women, peace and security's agenda, with the aim to facilitate coordinations and consistency in NATO's policy and activities, and to take forward the implementation of any NATO EPAC policy and action plan on women, peace and security. Ms. Hutchinson has been a long champion for women, peace and security and women's issues, working with women's groups for many years in supporting women's projects and women's empowerment. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So today we will be having a fireside chat. This is one of many, and we will get started. We will be asking some questions, and then we will also be answering some Q&A questions. So to get started, Ms. Hutchinson, what brought you to Women, Peace and Security?
Great. So let's start out by calling me Clare. So that's as we're having a fireside chat. And it's a good question because women, peace and security has meant different things to different people over the years since the adoption of the resolution. But for me, it's quite simply, it's not about women. I look at the second word there, and it's about security, because it is about how do we integrate women's voices and a gender perspective. And as you know, they are two very different things. You can be a woman and not support a gender perspective, and you can be a man and support a gender perspective. But it's how do we bring those into the conversations about security and about peace. And for me, women, peace and security is such a critical element of the discourse on security. And of course, as you know, for NATO, it is one of the central pieces and foundational areas that we work on, because we understand without a gender perspective in the work of security, we will not advance our work in a holistic way and in an effective way.
So I wanted to ask you, what is it like being NATO Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security? And that would mean, what is your role there? What does it mean as a day-to-day endeavor?
It's busy, that's for sure. It's a very busy job, and but it's something that I am extremely proud to be able to do, because being able to advise across NATO political structure here at headquarters, and to work with our military colleagues and our civilian colleagues, and to be able to give advice on women, peace and security that I know is going to be taken forward is incredibly important. But and every day, the work that we do, we work from committees, obviously. So, for example, this coming month, we have a North Atlantic Council meeting on women, peace and security, and where we're looking at progress of over the last 20 years. But the work we do is basically to facilitate women, peace and security across the whole of all of our core tasks and the functions and tasks we have. So that means making sure that a gender perspective is in cybersecurity, it's in the work we do on maritime, it's the work that we do in public diplomacy. So we have a very small team. And so there is about right now 15 of us, but it's sort of more fluid because we rely on voluntary national contributions. And we have temporary staff and also some long-term staff. But we also have, as well under our mandate, human security. And that means we also work on cultural property protection, children armed conflict, protection of civilians, and human trafficking and sexual violence. Because we believe that all of those cross-cutting issues have to be infused with a gender perspective. So we have about 7 mandates altogether that we are moving forward at the same time. We have just, last year, we adopted and our council endorsed a policy on preventing and responding to sexual exploitation abuse. It was our first ever policy. We've just now endorsed the action plan. And next we'll be working on a conflict-related sexual violence policy. So we're moving policies on women, peace and security forward, but we're also making sure we have action plans to implement them on the ground. We have action plans to implement them at political level. And so the work we do is politically focused, but it has impact because it's driven through SHAPE, our colleagues and on the military, our military colleagues, and making sure that everything we do in our operations, activities, and missions is also infused with women, peace and security. So every day is a busy day, but it's exciting times because we're seeing a lot of movement, a lot of traction, and we're very proud of the work we've accomplished, but more to be done.
Ms. Hutchinson, can I ask you what motivated you to pursue a career in women, peace and security? Was there a specific moment you could recall?
Well, I was lucky enough to be born to phenomenal women. My grandmother was the first woman that in her time in her village to have a motorbike. So I grew up with strong and incredibly supportive women and men in our family who believe that as a woman you can do anything. And so I have long been a feminist, and I'm very proud to be a feminist. But working on women, peace and security itself was something that came to me when I was working in communications in the 90s. And I heard about and watched the developments in the Balkans. And I listened to women's voices. And there was actually at a time a group of women called Electronic Witches. And they were an underground group of women who were working on technology from a basement in Sarajevo. And they were bringing out to the attention of the international community what was happening to women's lives and women's bodies and what was happening vis-a-vis the conflict. And it fascinated me to hear this because as I sat in my very comfortable and very safe house and from a loving family, I realized that I have been blessed in my life, and yet there are women out there who aren't as fortunate. And that I felt with my education and my opportunities in life, I have a responsibility to see what I can do to advance not only the protection of women, but the empowerment of women. And so for me, that was a catalyst moment. And I decided to, when I went back to university to do my master's degree, to start focusing on women post-conflict. And then I also looked at pre-conflict, and I looked at early warning indicators, what happens to women's bodies and their lives when conflict is coming. And so my commitment to women, peace and security is not only a career commitment, it is a personal commitment, because I think we have a responsibility to do the best we can for those who cannot be in situations to look after themselves, to protect themselves, and that we have to move an agenda forward that allows women, whether you're feminist or not feminist, to be empowered, to have a place to speak that's safe, and to be able to put your voice forward equal to anybody else. And I am driven, as the UN would say, I am seized of the matter every day, and very proud of the work that we do, and many organizations do. And the people who work on this agenda, I think, are incredibly bold and have great vision. So it's a wonderful place to be able to work, and there can be great success and achievements. But again, as I said, we have a lot more to do.
Wonderful. So you've already addressed this slightly, but I wanted to ask you to expand on it a little bit. So what does women, peace, and security mean to you? What does it encompass? And how would you describe it to somebody who does not necessarily have this background?
Yeah. Women, peace, and security shouldn't be a place where people become nervous about. And I know there's a lot of confusion around what is women, peace, and security. What is a gender perspective? What does it mean? And it doesn't mean, it's not a zero-sum game where you have progress for women and increase of women's rights, and therefore men lose. The idea is about equality, and that men and women gain. Women, peace, and security is about security, as I said, but it's about advancing security so everybody feels that they have protection, that everybody feels they have a voice, that everybody feels included, and that everybody's voice is heard equally. And I think it's very important that we unpack what this means, because there's sometimes a different or a false assumption that women, peace, and security means it's about women. It's not about women, even though the title would assume it was. It's about security, but it's about making sure that women's perspectives and perceptions of security are there and equal to men. Now, very often previously I worked with peacekeeping operations and in the UN, and I worked for many years in different missions. And I used to always ask women, what does security mean to you? What does the perception of security mean? And women very often do not respond that it is the stronghold of security, it is the strong and the big footprint of security being military intervention or what we would assume to be traditional security. They often fall to, it's about human security. It's about security in terms of environmental. It's about making sure we have a safe place to have our children to be able to get food. So the security for different people means different things. And women, peace, and security has to bring that to the fore, because we have to understand the differences in perceptions of security. We need to bring those into play, because if we're ignoring 50% of the population, as women are, we're not doing security justice, and we're not doing women or men serving them justice. And so we have to make sure at the middle of security is women, peace, and security. But it isn't about women. It is about security. It also is a responsibility for everybody to take place in. And this means we have to have partnerships with men. And men have to understand that it rests on the shoulders of us all. Because if we fail to do this, we are failing to implement secure environments, to do security in a way that is holistic. And so unpacking this is very important as we move forward. And for the recognition to be that gender and gender perspectives make it better for everybody, and that the work of security has to include a feminist approach, and if not a feminist approach, then at least, the very least, a gendered approach.
My next question is about COVID. How do you see the women, peace, and security agenda being pushed forward during COVID and beyond?
Yeah, unfortunately, COVID has been obviously for everybody in every sector and everywhere. We have all been, we've all suffered in terms of this pandemic. What has been interesting with COVID and shocking to see is the glaring disparities, therefore, for women and men in terms of COVID. Now, we know that COVID has affected women and men differently. We know that men have, in many cases, the more mortality rates for men are higher. But what has opened, what we have seen is the increase in domestic violence, and that's because of being shut down. That the spikes in numbers, and that has come to us very clearly. But we've also seen in some cases, for example, in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, the numbers of women infected is low, but the numbers of women dying is high. And when you unpack that and do the gender analysis on it, the reasons, of course, are in many of the rural areas, there are no female doctors. So women aren't allowed to go and be tested or to seek treatment. but therefore then they're dying quicker than men. And so what we need to do is we need to recognize through sex disaggregated data. And what we have realized is every nation is not producing the sex disaggregated data that is so necessary for us to do response and to do response well. So I think in terms of where are we in gender equality, we have been pushed back. There has absolutely been pushed back in terms of we haven't been able to deliver on our commitments, on the recommendations of the international community. And when I say we, I mean the international community has been pushed back. And that the work that had been going forward has slowed down. But it has certainly opened areas that we need to take more attention or pay more attention to, and that being sex disaggregated data, the access to, and how does this impact even on things like PPE, protective equipment, that is being suitable for men because it's been measured by a certain standard of height and measurements for males. But women, therefore, at the very beginning, weren't able to find the protective equipment because it wasn't made for them. That we have addressed. But it's these kind of consistent and persistent gender disparities that have been brought to light because of COVID. And that we have to really, really put our skates on in responding to this, because this pandemic is going to be around for a longer.
Wonderful. So the next question is more focused on your own personal journey. So would you care to give us an example or to expand on how you got to where you are today? What were some of the biggest assets and some of the biggest challenges you faced?
I would like to say that I have relied on the innate skills I have, and one of them is just pure dogmatic determination and tenacity. Because to work in women, peace and security, to work in gender and gender equality, you have to be determined. You have to never give up, because it is not an easy road. It is a road, and I would tell all the people who work for me, unless you are really involved and invested in this is not a career that's easy. It is not one that gives naturally, and it is not one where you find a lot of success. It's a long-term journey. But it is a journey that is rewarding because you can see the changes where people recognize that empowerment is so important. To be able to change the world is one of the biggest joys you can have. To be able to give back to something is one of the most incredible experiences. So the journey of this for me has been one that has been a commitment, where I have had to push many things in different ways, and have had to find ways to alternate the trajectory in some cases, but being tenacious and being determined and realizing this is about other people, this is about the world, this is about change, this is about momentum of change, and wanting to make change and make it for better. And so for me, I see things, and of course, when you work in gender, everything becomes a gendered issue. And most recently, something as simple as calling a meeting, and we had some wonderful interns in our meeting, and they were all invited, everybody was invited to say their name. And there were some people in the back seats, young men and young women in the back seat. And when they were invited to say the name, the young man spoke for the young women. And that is what we have to change. And this is a constant journey that women need to have their space. We have to call it out and seek it out. And we have to be vigilant in the way we see change. And so the journey for me is a long one, but it is a journey that may be bumpy, but it's certainly a journey that has a wonderful vision, and a vision that we walk towards. And I like to bring people along with me, because I think what the benefits of gender equality can give way outweigh the challenges that are on that road. So this personal journey of mine is one of joy, but also one that needs a lot of commitment and a lot of dedication.
Is there a time, or do you have a story of when you were advocating for women, peace, and security, and it had an impactful moment, or when you were working at the NATO NATO?
I think, I mean, I think of that time when we had our colleagues who wouldn't come to the table. There's a lot of examples in terms of NATO, but in terms of change and how change can be so positive. We put out a language manual on how to do inclusive gendered language this year. And now we're changing all the signs in NATO. We no longer say chairman. We use language. And what's lovely to see is colleagues who don't work on this and colleagues from other divisions are now saying, I'm asking them to change the word manning because I don't think it's appropriate. I'm asking them to change this in my section or my unit. The idea of the roll-on effect, the domino effect, the snowball effect of the work that we're doing and seeing others carry that forward is it's wonderful to see. We have seen a lot of change, and these are the areas that I take great pride in because it's leaving a legacy that I know that makes NATO stronger, that it brings NATO as a progressive alliance, it brings us into the future. And so the ability to be able to change the way we think about language, the way we've changed by putting gender into the middle of policies and the work we do on defense investment. This year in March, we give out an award to the division that has advanced the most in women, peace and security. And this year it was our defense investment team won. And sometimes you think defense investment would be a hard sell, it would be difficult, but they have progressed so much by putting gender perspectives into their work, which was a great example and role modeling for everybody else. So the stories that we have of success and of progression are those which we're very proud of. And I think the movement of women, peace and security, as I call it a movement, is slowly not only embedding itself into NATO, but it's pushing NATO into the future. And that is a good thing to see.
So what would you say is your biggest contribution to WPS at NATO?
Oh, wow. I think everything, it's not my personal contribution. I believe this, I am a member of a team. I am a member of a team. I work for the Secretary General. I work with the leadership. And I believe that with the commitment of the Secretary General and the commitment of leadership, we have managed to turn something that was quite marginalized at one point into something that is in the center of the work we do. Just yesterday, we launched the first leadership task force for NATO here at headquarters, of which all leaders from the military side and the civilian side met together under the chairship of the Deputy Secretary General to talk about women, peace and security. And this will be a task force twice a year that they meet. And we put on the table the progress, the challenges, and how we discuss this. That is something, again, we're very proud of in our team because we've been working on this for a few years. It holds accountable where it should be. And so the movements we're seeing across all of the work we're doing, I am very proud of. And I hope that I've been able to steer when I come to eventually move on from NATO, to look back and think there's been an ability to steer a mandate on women, peace and security, the connection and the commitment to women, peace and security, so that it remains steadfast in NATO, that the understanding of women, peace and security is now clear, that everybody feels it's organic, it's part of their work, and that the future is about women, peace and security, and women, peace and security is the future for NATO.
How can Canadians support international governmental organizations like NATO and the United Nations?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. How can Canadians support international governmental organizations like NATO and the United Nations on their work for women, peace, and security?
Well, come work for us. Of course, we need a few good women and a few good men. By taking the commitment, and Canadian, and as a Canadian, I know I don't sound it, but as a Canadian, a proud Haligonian, I must say, understanding that this is part of our DNA. This is part of how we see the world is in with justice and fairness. Canada and started peacekeeping. I mean, the idea that we understand the international community, we understand the world in a certain way. We had one of the First Nations to have a feminist foreign policy. We have a lot of things we need to be proud of as Canadians, and the support to gender equality and to women's rights is one of those. And as Canadians, as young Canadians, to get on board and to be part of that international world, because we are very fortunate in Canada. There is a world out there that's not so fortunate. I started my career as a UNV, a UN volunteer, in Kosovo many years ago. That was the best experience probably I can think of in my career, because it allowed me to understand a country post-conflict, a place post-conflict. It allowed me to understand a situation of women post-conflict, and it allowed me to understand how we can make the world, or address the challenges to make the world better. To give back is, again, one of the best things you can do, and to be able to take your knowledge and to take your understanding, to take your experiences and to share that, so that we can advance the values that we have, we can advance the understanding of the world, and we can advance what we hold dear, by giving to and giving and receiving back from other places, is one of the best things you can do. And I would suggest that we all hold our hands up and say, we are a feminist. We are proud to be feminist, because feminism does not mean anything other than equality. And for all of us to work together to advance equality, gender equality, and to seek that the women, peace, and security principles are fully formed, fully embedded, and implemented.
Great answer. So I would also like to ask you, what are some of the challenges of executing a women, peace, and security framework in some of these large organizations like the UN or NATO?
Would you believe me if I said none? There are no challenges. There are many challenges. And the challenges run from not understanding what women, peace, and security or gender equality means, to thinking it's about women, to thinking it's about a women's issue. And I hate the word women's issue, because not an issue. It is a topic, or it is an avenue to work on, or something that we aspire to improve, but it's not an issue. The challenge is often in funding. Funding for women's civil society is very limited. The challenges on the implementation of national action plans, not fully formed and delivered on the implementation. And the challenges are not fully understanding how this can improve security. And quite often, and for many years, it used to be, we're going to deal with the important things first, and then we'll deal with what you're talking about. And that is changing, but it's not changing fast enough. And it's been 20 years since the adoption of Resolution 1325. My fear is it's going to take another 20 years to implement everything. We need to realize we have to work faster, because lives are at risk in many cases. The idea that conflict-related sexual violence is still happening in situations of conflict is appalling. We have to do better at elevating to the political level, and the political level to the implementation level. There has to be partnerships, and the challenges that each individual organization may be siloed in this, that needs to be addressed as well. We have to do better working together. We have to do better at governments working together on these issues and finding commonality. And we have to do better as individuals within organizations to make this happen. So the challenges remain a lot, but I am very positive that the responses are getting quicker. We just need to make sure we don't take our finger off that button, that foot off the gas, as we would say, because we have to drive probably a little bit faster as we move to the next decade of women, peace and security.
Wonderful. What career advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, the career advice I'd give to me, but I would also give to everybody else, is don't be worrying at 18 what you're going to be when you're 40. Because the world is a journey, and the world is a great place, and the world is full, and there's lots for you to do. And I think finding your journey, using your journey to find yourself and to find what you really, really believe in. I hadn't found what would make me, I call tick. I hadn't found what I love to do until I actually started working in this agenda, in the international community. I work for the UN and now for NATO. And my younger self would be to say, stop worrying about that. It's okay to explore and to finally get to where you want to be. And that the journey doesn't have to be easy, and the journey doesn't have to be as straight and narrow, because you also will have many obstacles in your way. One of life's lessons is how do you deal with the obstacles. The success in life is not how you have found success, it's how you've dealt with the challenges to achieve your success. And so for anybody working and finding your way forward, and I worked in many things when I was younger, trying to post-university, and then also as I was working towards my master's degrees, seek those experiences and have fun with them and enjoy life, and take your knowledge and your education and your experience and do something that will allow you to find your true voice, because that also takes a while. And interesting enough, and it's hard to believe today, but I didn't have a voice when I was younger, that I felt I might say the wrong thing at the wrong time, and then I would look silly. And now I don't care, because you have to have that luxury to have the voice, but share that voice, and your opinions matter. And there's no right or wrong opinion, because it's your opinion, and it is your opinion to share. And I would say to my younger self, be bold and speak up and speak out, and do not be frightened to do that.
Wonderful. And so we have one more prepared question, and then we're going to hand it off to the other interns to ask you some questions via the chat and the Q&A. But I just wanted to ask, what does the future hold for Clare Hutchinson?
Wow, greatness. No, I'm kidding. The future, I believe, the future will definitely hold something that's to do with my feminist principles, my women, peace and security experience. I would like to continue on this journey, because I don't think the battle has been won yet, and I don't believe it possibly won't be while I still have a career. But wherever it will be something where I can wake up every day and enjoy what I do, wake up every day and believe I can make a change. And I can wake up every day and be happy with myself, because it's about your own integrity that you have to hold. I believe I have still a lot left to do. And wherever that takes me, it certainly will be in the community of finding equality and finding the voice for us all, so that we can promote equality for everybody.
Thank you. So now we'll move on to the Q&A portion of this discussion. So our first question is, what kind of challenges did you experience in your work as gender advisor for the United Nations in places like Kosovo and Lebanon, and in what ways did you overcome them?
Great, nice question, thank you. So working as a gender advisor, and again, like I said, unless you're committed and you really believe in this, it wasn't a good career choice, because it's a difficult career to do, and it's a difficult job to do. But when you believe in what you're doing, and this is for anything, whether you're selling vacuum cleaners to whether you're working in the international community, believing in what you're doing is the essence of success, and that you can transform that. When I was working in Kosovo, it was very early on in 2003 and 4 until 2008. And one of the challenges was there was very little knowledge about why this was important. And of course, when you're working in a place where it's just come out of conflict, in any conflict, asking people to understand gender disparities, and it's not quite clear. So you have to really sharpen your language. You have to sharpen the way you sell what you're doing. And so the challenge was quite often, this doesn't belong here. That was often what we would hear, that it's not an economic issue, it's not a political issue, it is a women's issue. And so the challenge was try to bring people on board. When people, I mean my own colleagues, friends, people who I worked with. And so trying to sharpen your tool by the articulation of what it is you mean became very important. And it's something that has worked with me today, and I brought with me today. How do we find what we want to do? How are we going to articulate that so it makes sense? And working on gender as a gender advisor, you really do have to, as I usually say, have the elevator pitch. You have to be able to articulate that in a few moments as you're in that elevator and you have the attention of the special representative of the mission, or be it that, or even a CEO of a company or whatever. You have to be able to sharpen your selling pitch. And that has been a challenge. And then as we move on, trying to work with colleagues from both the military and the civilian side to make it work from the political but down to the operational, being able to understand the language, understand how it applies to the work we do. But also one of the challenges is making women's voices integral to that work. So, and it's a challenge that hasn't always, it hasn't left for many people. We still do have gender advisors who have those ongoing challenges of trying to get their story and their message out. And it's something we have to constantly work on.
So I believe the next question is from one of our senior research fellows, Victoria Heath, and we have the ability for her to ask it herself. So Victoria.
Hi, thank you so much. I didn't know you could do this, so I love that I can ask this question myself. Yeah, so my name is Victoria. I'm a senior research fellow at the NATO Association. And my question is, how is your team and sort of NATO more broadly ensuring that the rights and the challenges and the concerns of transgender and gender non-conforming people are also included in the policies and the initiatives that's coming out of the Women, Peace and Security agenda?
Well, hello, Victoria. Nice to see your name, if not your face. And thank you for that question. And a very good question. We get asked this question quite often. And so how I'll explain it is that in terms of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, while the agenda itself in terms of the resolutions has moved on to be more progressive, as you will see, they have not necessarily incorporated transgender or LGBTQI community. What we have done in NATO is we've divided this up so that executive management, which is our human resources division, they have put into place discussions and considerations on how we will move forward on those specific areas. Our military colleagues, indeed, last year in the NATO Committee on Gender Perspectives, which is every year, they have a conference. And part of that, one of the elements of their conference was talking about diversity in terms of transgender, lesbian, gay, transsexual, intersex communities. So we are looking at it. Obviously, it takes a conversation that has to be respectful of those in the different areas of our communities. We do not put it as part of the Women, Peace and Security mandate. And we don't do that because, one, it's not necessarily in the resolution. but also because each of those individual aspects of diversity need to have respect on their own as they stand on their own. And we don't believe that it's a pick and mix grab bag where you just put everything into one mandate and then that works. It doesn't. It's disrespectful to everybody. And so we work on getting gender in terms of the binary as it stands right now, women and men, and that basic understanding first. And then we will be able, once we get that, to move into the places where it is a much broader sweep in terms of diversity and sexual identity and gender identity. Now, many of our nation's militaries are doing really, including Canada, are doing good work in trying to advance this and have that discussion. And it is something that is an ongoing discussion, and it will be an ongoing discussion. And NATO is very much committed to that discussion. But again, we unpack it into two different places for us. And right now, it may change, but right now that makes sense for the work that we do.
Thank you so much.
We have our next question in the Q&A box, and they ask, has reducing the gender pay gap been an important element of Women, Peace and Security's agenda, and what initiatives have been taken regarding this issue?
Well, very proud to say that we don't have a gender pay gap in NATO because we have a standardized payment system like they do in the UN or in the EU, where we have it's based on the job you get, rank, performance, whatever. It's not based on your sex. But the gender pay gap is something that is within, as you know, in the world, it is still prevalent and it is still a huge problem. And that goes hand in hand with areas like gender pay gap because of maternity policies and paternity policies. And I do believe personally that paternity should be enforced in every country and that it should be mandatory, because then we would have less of an issue around gender pay gap and also economic imbalance for women and men. But for NATO, we're very lucky as a sort of standardized international civil service scale. We don't have any of those. We don't have to deal with that. And we are all paid in terms of equality being equality of rank and position.
Great. So our next question is from Maria Zelenova. Sorry, Maria, I'm not terribly good at saying your last name. I apologize. And I think Robert has the ability to let her speak as well.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. I would love to hear your thoughts on what NATO's role, and especially the WPES agenda, should be in the growing humanitarian crisis that's currently unfolding between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Maria. And again, nice to see you, your name. The work of the Women, Peace and Security, and when we talk about humanitarian, of course, those best placed to work on humanitarian is the UN. We have the recognition of the work we do in humanitarian is supporting humanitarian work through our protection of civilians mandate. As you will know, that our partners are a large and important area for NATO and our partners across the board. And we look at the international community and we look at the conflicts that take place around the world. And of course, we address them as we can in the formats we do, being that committees. But we have more than one burgeoning conflict. We have more than one growing conflict in many parts of the world. And we do this through our committees. Where Women, Peace and Security comes into play is that we do keep an eye and we make sure that we discuss with civil society. As you all know, we have a civil society advisory panel. We do not have anyone from the Caucasus, we have from Georgia a representative. And through that conversation with civil society, we get to hear about the different aspects of risk to women's lives and the protection that's going on, and that we will inform the work that we do, and then we'll present that to other parts of our house of NATO. by the knowledge we get from women. And so the Civil Society Advisory Panel is a very important mechanism for us. It is very important that we engage with women to hear what's happening on the ground and to hear about risks wherever conflict it may be, so that we can always be aware and knowledgeable about that, and that we can inform our colleagues.
Great. I think Sarah has another question.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Hutchinson, for this very motivational and very informative presentation. So my question is the following: how NATO influence other countries on gender equality without imposing their democratic Western values on other countries like Saudi Arabia?
Very good question, Sarah. And it's one I often get called out on by saying this is an imposition of Western values, and you have to be culturally respectful, of which I say absolutely, but this is not a Western value. This is a universal value. That the idea that women's equality and women's rights, even if you look in the Quran, as you will know, that the idea of how women and what women will do, and that women's advancement and the rights and human rights and the discussion around that, it goes across all religious canon, but it is a universal and universally held understanding of how we treat each other. What we're trying to do in terms of women, peace and security is look at the foundation of what makes security in any country, any nation, any state, and how do we adapt that? But it's not an imposition, because it's going back to majority of countries have signed on to CEDAW. Many countries have recognized Beijing platform. And we have the Security Council resolutions, which are very much there and at the fore of the membership of the United Nations, of the 193. What we do in NATO is, of course, because we're alliance, it is not about imposing onto any nation. Each of our nations have to want to advance this themselves. And that's where we do through our council, our North Atlantic Council. What we do is put on the plate, we put in front of our nations for their discussion, their agreement, something like a sexual exploitation abuse policy. And that is basically taking the values that we have all signed on to, and we've signed on through the United Nations, and we're reinforcing them in the way that NATO would like to see them. And so the agreement is a voluntary one. Each nation can say no, they don't want to and don't agree with it, so that it's not an imposition, but it is an agreement because of consensus. And so what we have in terms of reinforcing our values, they are a collective value. Now, in terms of our partnership for peace, and we go to our partners to work and we offer them a menu of different areas that they can sign on to in a way that is important to our partners, be it Ukraine or working, for example, in Georgia or in anywhere in the Middle East or North Africa. They will pick quite often women, peace and security, because they are also growing in awareness that this is important to their societies, is important to their security. And so we help them then reframe that and look at how does it work for them, be it in Jordan through training, be it in Kuwait through our center there. How do we put women, peace and security is by the request of the nation. And we offer that support. What we have seen though is a growth of that request, and that more nations are recognizing that this is important to them and to their futures. So we hold dear to the universal values, we reinforce them, we re-articulate them, and we hope that our partners and our allies are on board with all of this. And it's great to see what progress we've had in that area.
So we have a really great question that was asked anonymously. So how does the UN and NATO administer WPS differently? And is there anything that you wish these organizations could learn from each other?
Thank you, Anonymous, for your question. So what was very interesting for me when I came from the UN to NATO, the differences in the application of women, peace and security. And what I mean by that is the UN is an open call as a way. You would develop a policy and you'd put it out there. You do not need nations' agreement. you do not nations to sign off unless it's a Security Council resolution, of course. And you hope that that policy would stick. And in NATO, it is a consensus building alliance, and that no policy can go through, no agreement can be reached unless it's by consensus. And the difference is so in the time of doing something, it takes longer in NATO to get something, but you know, because it is consensus driven, that once the allies agree and the partners in depending on the policy, once they agree, like our sexual exploitation abuse policy or like our policy on women, peace and security, then it is an absolute. They have all agreed, they've signed on, and they will do this. You can't always guarantee that in the UN. Now, the UN obviously is more advanced in women, peace and security because they have been doing this longer. And actually the resolution itself, 1325, speaks directly to the UN. It does not speak to NATO. It does not speak necessarily to the military. But we have been able to use the lessons learned from the UN to build for ourselves a Women, Peace and Security Foundation. And we have taken a lot of their lessons. I'm also lucky that I came from the UN, so I was able to understand those lessons learned, good and not so good, and being able to build on them so that we now, we have learned a lot about sexual exploitation abuse because of our work with the UN. And we're able now to be able to do exchanges so they can also now learn from us. So a lot of the good practices we're taking from the UN and also from the EU and from the AU. We have a platform which NATO was a co-developer of called the Regional Acceleration of Resolution 1325, RAR, it's called. And that is a platform that brings together all of the international organizations, be it the AU, UN, OSCE, NATO. And we use this as a platform to discuss women, peace and security. It's an informal one, but it is one that has been going since 2016. And it allows us to share these good practices and to be able to advance in some of the areas where others are maybe lagging behind. And so, for example, we've been requested by some of those in the RA system to help them with a sexual exploitation abuse policy. So the work that we do together is really important, and we need to do more of that, because working as an international organization, especially if you're deploying troops. And one of the reasons we wanted to do the SEA policy was because when troops were deployed to NATO and they rehat into the UN or vice versa, we had different messaging, different standards, different requirements. And so we were confusing our troops. What we need to do is have consistency of messaging across international organizations so that when you go for one, you will know that it's the same message, the same standard, the same articulation of the mandate of women, peace, security. So there is no confusion, and that we can then advance collectively these priorities and these principles that we have.
Wonderful. I think Ravdeep also has a question he'd like to ask.
Hi. Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. So, hello. So I was reading one of your interviews, and I noticed that you stated, "We know when women are involved, that peace deals are more likely to last, that countries are more likely to be secure and stable when women are involved in the decision-making process." I was wondering if you can give us more insight and elaborate on this statement.
Sure. Thank you, Ravdeep, right?
Yes.
So thank you for the question. And it is one that has come up many times, because sometimes people say they don't believe that statement. It's not my statement, so I'm not going to take credit from it. That's actually something that came out of the UN in 2015. There was the global study that was commissioned by the UN to look at progression in 2015 of women, peace and security. And what we know that, and the meaning and I guess the essence of this is that when women are included in peace negotiations, that there will be more stability or a longer peace agreement, and say something like 20%. And we've seen this in places like Colombia. We've seen in places like in the Good Friday Agreement of Northern Ireland. We've seen that when women have a voice in the reconstruction of a community, in the reconstruction of the state, that the stability of the state is going to be longer. And that is because you're not ignoring 50% of the population. Unfortunately, the empirical evidence on it is still light. We can go by anecdotal evidence, but empirically, because there's not enough women involved in peace negotiations, quite simply, 20 years later. And we see negotiations from anywhere where women are being sidelined. We have in the Afghan negotiations now, and having women at that table, which a few, the agreements and the peace negotiations in Yemen, which we're not looking at a gender perspective and not necessarily women being fully engaged. And across the board, we know that women being excluded means you're excluding 50% of the population. So how can you expect to have stability as you move forward? Because they bring to the negotiation, they bring to the table a different experience. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a peaceful experience. We know that 20 to 30% of women are combatants in conflict, but they understand conflict differently because they've had a different experience of that. We know that women who have been brutalized by sexual violence, because we saw this in the Focha rape camps in the Balkans, we know the experiences that women have are different. And if you don't incorporate that difference into peace agreement, then you are losing an understanding of your community and half of your community of what they went through and how they are going to understand peace as it moves forward. And so the idea that having peaceful communities post-conflict and about the inclusion of women is a statistic that is used quite frequently by the UN. It is one that has light empirical evidence, but much more needs to be done to investigate this fully. And to really advance on this, because we seem to, in some cases, been going backwards with the inclusion of women in peace negotiations. And this isn't about having a woman at a table because she's a woman, but it has a woman having participation, genuine participation, which means having a voice and putting something there that will advance the peace negotiation itself. And that is really important as well, because parity only works when it is meaningful and it has genuine access and can advance whatever goal it's looking to do.
Wonderful. And our next question is from Adwet. Adwet?
Hello, Ms. Hutchinson. I hope you can hear me. It is a pleasure hearing you speak. I'm just an incoming research analyst. And as you just mentioned, I feel that security obviously has been a male-dominated field for the longest time, but thankfully there is a shift in paradigm. I was just going to ask you, what are some of the initiatives of your department that are aimed at encouraging women to enter this field? And how does this exactly vary with nations that are different in how conservative or progressive they are with this particular area?
I'm sorry, it wasn't clear. I didn't quite get the question. It was intermittent there. Can you repeat it?
I'm so sorry. Can you hear me properly now?
I can.
I was just going to ask you that given how sort of security has just been a male-dominated field, what are some of the initiatives of your department which are aimed at encouraging women to enter this field, and how do they vary with nations that are different in how conservative or progressive they are in response to this particular endeavor? Okay,
great, thank you. And nice to see your picture. So as you rightly pointed out, it is a male-dominated field. In terms of defense, it is a male-dominated field. We have, however, and we're very proud of this, more women as defense ministers now than we have had, and they're growing. So the idea that it's male-dominated is sort of reducing itself, and it's changing. But and if I understand your question correctly, the idea is how does this work with those nations who may not necessarily be supportive or understand this in the same way? Again, if we bring this back to the idea that this is about security, and this isn't about getting women jobs, this is about the best person for the best job, but the best person has to have the opportunity to become the best, and that security is not a man's domain. Security is very much about the population, the whole of population, and being able to understand how women think. Now, we have a project called the Women's Defense Dialogues. We launched this last year, and it's for every one of our allies. Sadly, we haven't had Canada do it yet, which is unfortunate. But it's reaching out to women across different nations and asking the women, what does security and protection mean to you? And what does NATO mean to you? And across the board, women, no matter which nation it is, will tell us something very different about security that men will see. And so we're trying to unpack this understanding that women, peace and security is about women. Because it's about security, and that it's important because women say something differently. And we have managed to bring all of our nations on board. Every one of our nations has adopted, again, our SEA policy has adopted our women, peace and security policy, is also driven by the desire to make change. And it may not be their ultimate priority, but they certainly are starting to recognize that the security part of women, peace and security, it has to be central to the work that we do. And the work on defense has to be informed by good gender practice and perspectives. So we are having traction in it. It is one of those areas that is difficult, because trying to translate the principles of women, peace and security into defense has taken a lot longer. And I do believe that this sector is one of the laggards. It's one of the late bloomers, should we say, to women, peace and security. But it certainly is changing. And the idea that it's male dominated, but I also want to reflect on the fact that because something is male dominated doesn't mean that it can't be infused with women, peace and security, because we're only talking about parity. But I would like to see more men take up the mantle of gender equality and challenging systems and challenging the discourse on it, because this isn't a woman's role, and it isn't certainly only the responsibility of women. And I think the idea that having a man, and some of the most incredible gender champions I've seen, for example, the chief of defense in Sweden, Michael Biden, was incredible in advancing it. Our own Chod, our own General Vance was a champion. Our own prime minister is a champion. So the idea of changing what looks like male dominated doesn't necessarily have to be anti or against gender or not pushing women, peace and security. I think we need to change that narrative too. But certainly defense is becoming much more aware of gender equality and much more progressive in how we do this. And in fact, next week on the 15th of October, we're having Women, Peace and Security online, we call our digital dialogue, and having a digital dialogue on the future of women, peace and security in NATO. And I hope you all join. It's through Zoom. And one of the speakers there is the Defense Minister for North Macedonia, who happens to be a woman. And so the progression and the change that we are seeing in defense, and changing this understanding that it belongs to one part of society being men, it certainly is changing. But again, we need to do more to change it faster and better.
Thank you so much.
I believe we'll take one last question from Emilio.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, we're good. Okay,
yes.
So thank you for joining us, Ms. Hutchinson. This has been very insightful. So I also did some volunteer gender advisory work abroad. And I wanted to ask you if there's been any specific exchanges you've had with stakeholders or partners or beneficiaries of your work that have stuck with you as you've progressed through your career.
Thank you. And yay, Emilio, gender advisor. We need more men gender advisors. There were many conversations that have stuck with me, and some of them I would not repeat here. I think from the very beginning, and I can remember this when I first started out as a gender advisor, and I was told a couple of things. One, I was told that, and it was translated to me, please don't interfere. We'll get to your little issues soon. We're talking about really important things right now. And that's when I decided that I would stay with this agenda, because I was going to change that narrative. I was also told that if I didn't wear red lipstick, it'd probably be better, because I'd probably be taken more seriously, of which I then went out and bought more. And so I've been told many things that have been, in a way, some have been trying to be friendly suggestions as a gender advisor. Some of them have been, I was told that it would be more beneficial for a man to speak than for me to speak, because it would have more resonance in a security environment. There are many things that I've been told. And those we welcome and embrace. I welcome and embrace. But then we move them on themselves and we respond accordingly, saying that's not going to happen. I think for gender advisors, one of the most difficult things that they would ever have to deal with is the lack of sometimes respect to the agenda, not understanding that it is important. But I must say, I'm very happy that through the years, and I'm talking about when I started 20 years ago, through the years, those kind of comments about, and I think it's different for men and women who work in gender as well, but comments about, even what you wear and how you perform were very different for gender advisors who were women. The changes that we've seen have been that it has become much more respectable to recognize this, and it has become known that this is really going to stay. It's part of the implementation of peace and security, or for us, part of the integration into defense. And so there's many conversations which have been interesting and challenging. But the conversations, and what I always, and I believe today, that if somebody is having a problem or pushing back against you, you're making change. Because if somebody didn't care enough, it wouldn't matter. But when there is resistance to what you're doing, then you're on the right track, because there's enough interest to push back. And when that happens, you're going somewhere. The key is, how do you drive past the resistance to make sure that this is going to have traction, to have feet, so to speak. And so the conversations against or that have challenged me have been the ones that have made the work in terms of gender and integration of gender much more powerful. And I actually prefer in many times to speak to those who don't see this as important, because then I can understand where they're coming from, and then I can retool myself. I can reframe my conversation. I can refocus the argument so that we can really convince of the necessity of women, peace and security. And so I actually do embrace the negative comments or the challenging questions, because I think we can learn more from those who push against in many cases.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hutchinson. That was our last question. Thanks for joining us this morning. This was a very insightful conversation.
Thank you very much for having me. It was lovely. It was a pleasure to speak to all of you, and thank you for all your questions and those gender balance questions as well. I applaud you, and I thank you very much for hosting this. And I hope at some point we can see each other physically in reality, as opposed to just on screen. And best of luck to you all, and take care and be safe.
Thanks so much, Claire. And for anyone watching, the NATO Association of Canada continues to push forward in this and many other areas. And we encourage you to become part of our community and to help us to make sure that Canada is prepared to deal with the challenges of the world and to be part of the international rules-based order, of which NATO, of course, is an integral part. Claire, thank you so much for all of your work. We're rooting for you all the time here in Canada, and it's a real great pleasure to be able to talk to you today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.